Acts 17, verse 1 to 9, presents a moment where the proclamation of the risen Christ collides with the established order of the age that was passing away. Acts of the Apostles records that Paul and Silas came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. As was his custom, Paul entered and reasoned with them from the Scriptures over 3 Sabbaths, opening and alleging that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, and declaring, "This Jesus, whom I preach unto you, is Christ." This reasoning was not merely an appeal to isolated texts, but an unveiling of the entire covenantal narrative reaching its fulfillment. The law, the prophets, and the writings had all anticipated a suffering Messiah, not one who would establish an earthly political dominion, but one who would bring to completion the age of shadows and inaugurate the reality to which they pointed. The necessity spoken of was not imposed from without, but inherent within the divine purpose that had been unfolding since the beginning. Among those who heard, some were persuaded. A multitude of devout Greeks, and not a few of the chief women, believed and joined Paul and Silas. This gathering reveals the widening of what had long been promised, that the nations would be brought near, not through adherence to the old covenant structures, but through the finished work of the Christ. Their belief was not a process of gradual qualification, but a reception of what had already been accomplished. The message did not invite them into a probationary standing, but declared a completed reconciliation. Yet alongside belief arose opposition. The text describes certain Jews who were moved with envy. Their reaction was a theological disagreement, but a defense of a system that was being rendered obsolete. They gathered lewd fellows of the baser sort, set the city in an uproar, and assaulted the house of Jason, seeking to bring Paul and Silas out to the people. This hostility reflects more than personal resentment. It manifests the tension between 2 ages overlapping for a brief moment in history. On one side stood the structures centered in the temple, the law, and the identity markers of Israel under the Old Covenant. On the other side stood the proclamation that all of these had reached their fulfillment and were no longer the basis of standing before God. The disturbance in the city mirrors the deeper upheaval of a world being shaken so that what could not remain would be removed. When they did not find Paul and Silas, they dragged Jason and certain brethren before the rulers of the city, crying out, "These that have turned the world upside down are come hither also." This accusation, though intended as a charge, speaks more truth than the accusers realized. The world being overturned was not the physical creation, but the ordered system of covenant life centered in Jerusalem and governed by the law. What appeared as disorder was, in reality, the unveiling of a new and enduring order. They further accused them of acting contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, one Jesus. This charge highlights the misunderstanding of the nature of Christ's kingship. The reign being proclaimed was not in competition with earthly rulers on their own terms. It was a reign established through death and resurrection, seated not in an earthly throne room, but in the heavenly realm. His kingship did not arise through conquest by force, but through the completion of all that was required to bring humanity into union with himself. The rulers of the city were troubled when they heard these things. They took security from Jason and the others and let them go. Even this response reflects the uncertainty of the time, a period where the old order had not yet fully passed, yet its end was inevitable. The pressure exerted against the message could not halt what had already been accomplished. Within this passage, the emphasis remains on the sufficiency and finality of what Christ had done. The message Paul proclaimed was not centered on what must still be achieved, but on what had been fulfilled. The suffering and resurrection of the Christ were not beginnings awaiting completion, but the completion itself, the decisive act that brought the ages to their appointed transition. Thus, the disturbance in Thessalonica serves as a visible sign of an invisible reality. The passing of one covenantal world and the establishment of another, secured entirely by the finished work of the risen Christ, proclaimed openly among both Jew and Gentile, and received by those who heard and believed.